So it looks like we're still missing a few people. I guess we have a couple minutes.
Hey, Quinn, are you managing to share because we're not seeing anything?
Yeah, I need to, I think, download it as a Word presentation.
Okay, if it's easier, I can just share it from my computer, share the PDF.
Okay, let me just try one more thing and then I will let you know.
There's Michael. I think we're just missing John.
One more.
Oh wait, and John said he wasn't going to be able to make it today, so I think we're all here.
Okay, well, it's 3:30. I guess we'll get started. Welcome guests. Looks like everybody's here except John Hill, so we won't, we'll skip the formal roll call. And Lynette, would you like to introduce our guests from Carmel High School? Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Our two guests today represent the Carmel High School Environmental Club, and one of them is the faculty member at Carmel High, Jason Moss-Baldwin, who is the faculty sponsor for the work that the Environmental Club does and works with the students, one of whom is Quinn Nachbar, who's with us today, who is the president of the club. And the work that they do and the outreach that they do is really exciting and something that I'm very happy that they will share with you on behalf of the fellow students and other members of the faculty who are supportive of these environmental efforts. So Jason, I will hand it first to you to begin the presentation, and then Jason will go to Quinn in order to do the slides.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Lynette. Thank you all so much for having us. We're excited to just be connected to the city. We have an environmental club that has been going strong here for over 20 years and has from year to year an enrollment of anywhere from 15 to 40 students, and they're really passionate about affecting change in our local communities. And so we're excited to just introduce ourselves, and we hope that this can give us a possibility to have more connections with a bunch of students who have this strong desire to take action in their community, and then a group that has the ability to connect us with some of those opportunities. And since this is a student-driven club, myself and Brian Granberry have been the mentors from year to year for the past 15 years. But this is a student-driven club, and we really let students take ownership over what they want to do with the club every year. And so with that in mind, I'm going to actually pass so that you can get to know a little bit about what we do. I'm going to pass this off to Quinn, who is our outgoing environmental club president, 4-year member, and just a very inspirational young woman who, if you meet her, it doesn't take long to have that sense rub off on you. So Quinn, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. MB. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for like having us or allowing us to present. Like Mr. MB said, I think it's really cool that we can involve the school and the city and have a collaboration. And I'm sorry that, it's taken so long to get to that point, but it's exciting that we're doing this now. It's better now than never. I have a presentation to just kind of like give you guys a sense of what we do at Carmel High. And I think that we can share the slides.
Do you want me to do that?
Yes, please. I wasn't able to access my drive on my phone. All right. Can everybody see the presentation? All good? We all good? Can everybody see it? Yeah? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so obviously we're Carmel High Environmental Club, and the next slide kind of gives an overview of our mission statement. And so it's pretty broad, but it's the Carmel High School Environmental Club aims to improve the quality of our school and community through education, action, and encouraging others to make the right decision for our planet. And so we just kind of like embody this statement and everything that we do with our club. And it really is focused on what can we do as, high schoolers to just make small little improvements and changes in our local community and to increase sustainability at our school. And so continuing, I just wanted to emphasize how beautiful the place we live in is. These are all pictures that I've taken within, 5 miles or so of our high school. And so obviously this is why, like, I personally care so much about our area. It's beautiful and we're so blessed to be able to live here. And I feel blessed to be able to work towards protecting it and, doing anything I can to make a difference, even if it's small. And so I am always just in awe with the beauty of the place we live in. It's just incredible. And we're so lucky to call it our home. And so following that, a huge part of making any improvement, I think personally, in any community is through education. And so obviously, since we're at the high school, that's like right at our fingertips, and having Mr. MB and Mr. Granberry as our mentors, they are professionals in their field. And so what we do is we do little things, like we do a green minute. And so almost every week, 1 or 2 members of the club will make a little video, and they'll just, give a little tip or a little word of advice. So for example, a few weeks ago, I did a little clip that I sent in to Mr. Granberry, who's also the video production teacher. And so I, talked about how it's important to compost from your home because it reduces greenhouse gas emissions if that food is, put back into the earth instead of brought to the landfill, for example. And so these are just like little things that students at the school will see every Friday and maybe like take into consideration when they go back home. And so we also work with the leadership class to just make our school events more sustainable. So for example, we've, switched from plastic utensils and, plastic cups to like compostable utensils and cups at school events. And we've really tried to emphasize using paper instead of plastic for decorations and stuff like that. And so we've really been able to collaborate with leadership when we can to, create a more sustainable school environment. And then one of my favorite things that we do, and we did this a lot more before COVID hit, was we did movie nights. So we would show a documentary that would talk about, a relevant environmental issue. And we would host it at our school because we have a beautiful theater that we're blessed to be able to use. And members of the community could come, students could come. Mr. MB would encourage his environmental studies class to come. And we would host a documentary, and then we'd have a panel of experts that we'd invite to the school, and anybody in the audience after the movie was done could ask questions. And so it really created an educational like outreach program for members of the community and for like students at our school, where we could, discuss and learn about pressing environmental issues and really take it into consideration and go home and, like practice any of the tips that were suggested in the documentary at the screening. So those are really, really fun. And I'm hope that that the club can do it next year as well. When we can all gather in the theater. So for our next slide, we've got some bigger things, which is improving our campus. So to create our campus as a whole, to create a more sustainable atmosphere. And so we put in water dispensers, and I'm pretty sure that was through a grant from the Ocean Guardian School program. And so we got water dispensers so people can fill up their reusable water bottles. And then we also last year put in educational signs that discourage idling in the parking lot, because a lot of students would be cold and turn on their cars and blast the heater during lunch or something like that, or before school, and be idling the entire time. So we really try to encourage no idling. And this also applies to parents who are waiting to pick up their kids. And so we put those signs all over the parking lot. And then finally, we have, the pretty typical compost and landfill and recycle signs on trash cans around our campus. And I think a big project for the club in the following years is going to be to improve those systems, because I think in the community and at our school, people tend to just kind of pass over the fact that there's a big sign that says recyclables, and they'll throw like whatever they want into that trash can anyways, just because it's easy. And so we're really trying to think of ways to improve that system, because I think it's really important, especially living in the area that we do, which encourages recycling for sure. Another fun activity that we did was we did a waste audit. And so this picture looks really gross, but it's basically, this isn't a picture that I took personally, but this is the general idea. We collected the trash and all the trash bags from the full day, and we spread everything out on tarps, and we organized it. We had gloves on and stuff. And we did this during a lunch period. So everybody at the school who was in the main area could see like, okay, this is what, goes into the trash cans. This is what you guys are throwing away. And so it really brought awareness to how much students are, throwing away, and what they're putting into the trash cans, and what can be instead put into the recycle bins, which are labeled recycle, or the compost bins. And so I think even though it's kind of gross and we definitely had to get dirty doing it, it was worth it because it brought awareness to what people just carelessly throw away. So this year has actually been really fun because we've still been engaging in tasks to improve our community. So we've been doing socially distanced beach cleanups. And so we've got some pictures with trash that we collected from Monterey State Beach. And it was a really easy thing to do during quarantine, because obviously you're outside and you can very easily distance on the beach, and we could still, work towards improving our community. And so those are really fun. Like we would all get together as a club, go down to the beach, pick up trash, and we just all felt good doing it. Another thing that we've been able to do this year, especially this second semester, has been restoration. So we've been working with, and I'll explain this a little bit more on further slides, but we've been working with Paulo Corona Regional Park, Los Arboles Middle School, and we've also developed a partnership with the state parks. We haven't done any restorations with the state parks yet, but we really, really hope to continue that partnership next year. And I'm gonna hopefully be coming back and checking in with Mr. MB and seeing if the club has been able to continue that partnership. And then one thing that we did, which was so amazing in the fall of 2019, was the last president's, I was vice president then, but we organized a climate strike in Monterey. And so this was, following Greta Thunberg's call for action in order to, promote the fact that we're in a climate crisis. And so we all gathered in Monterey before COVID, obviously. And we, marched down the streets, and we had signs that were, advocating for policy change. And we gathered with other people who were down on the roads with signs, and, cars would drive by and like honk at us and like give us support. And so it was really empowering. And then in the next slide, you can see a full image of it. Yeah. So that's all of us with our signs. And I don't know, it was a very, very empowering feeling to be a student at the high school. Really, like, we were all just like putting our passion and our voices out there. And it was probably one of the best experiences that I've had with, climate justice, and like really like showing that, we care, we're the next generation, and we do care about this. And so that was super fun. So this is continuing with like improving our community. And these are just a few examples on the next slides, but we, in October of 2020, so this is like right before, during quarantine, we all went down to Carmel Beach, and at the north end of the beach, there's this little cove. And what we did is we took kayaks and paddle boards and snorkels, and we brought mesh bags, and we dove down, like we free dove in our wetsuits, and we collected golf balls from the bottom of Carmel Bay. And so obviously, like, everybody knows, everybody's local here, so we know there's that nice golf course right above Carmel Bay, and the golfers love to hit their balls into oblivion, but hitting their balls into nowhere is actually just hitting them into the ocean. And so we actually were inspired to do this because of two Carmel High students who graduated about 4 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago. And on the next slide, you can, I'll give a little bit of, oh, wait, sorry. Is that slide in there? It should be like one up. Oh no, it didn't transfer over. It's okay, I'll just explain it. So Alex Weber and Jack Johnson were two Carmel High students, and they were very passionate about this, this golf ball project. And so golfers in Pebble Beach for 98 years have been hitting balls into the Pacific. And what Alex and Jack did is that they pulled more than 9,000 golf balls out of Carmel Cove. And they created an incredible movement to discourage, hitting golf balls into Carmel Cove, and, just kind of in general, just like bringing awareness to this issue that probably nobody even thought about before they discovered this. And they actually discovered all these golf balls when they were, just snorkeling one day, and they looked down and they see these mounds of white golf balls. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is a huge issue. And so what they did is they created an entire project out of it, and they brought like major awareness to the issue. And so we were inspired by them to do a little cleanup of our own. And so we actually hope to do one more at the end of this year, because it was super fun. And it was really nice to be able to walk back along the beach with our like heavy bags of golf balls, because we had just pulled all of those out of the bottom of the cove. So this is a picture of us doing our cleanup at Monterey State Beach. That beach definitely needs a lot of love, because a lot of trash does wash up onto the shores there. And so we've done about 3 beach cleanups there in particular. And then our next slides go over our restoration work. So we actually were super fortunate to be able to work with Paulo Corona Regional Park, which is a beautiful park. I've really enjoyed it being open for hiking and running. But we partnered with a man named Scott, who runs a restoration project at Paulo Corona. And he actually grows all of his own natives in a greenhouse at on his property. And so we were able to plant about 300 plants in one day, actually. And on these little plots of land, because they're trying to restore over 200 acres of the park and really just bring it back to its natural environment, because again, it was a golf course before. And so obviously the natural landscape was completely altered because of the golf course. But we were able to go, and he showed us what to do. We would drill holes in the ground and put in these like little baby natives. And yeah, and so now, you know, in a few years, all those natives will be bigger and we'll be able to restore the natural landscape. And hopefully we'll be able to, you know, continue to be partners with Paula Corona Regional Park. Like Carmel High and Paula Corona will be able to have a partnership for many years to come. So this is just another little picture of that. You can see all the little tubes with the natives in it. And then this is a picture about, I'd say 3 months after we spread poppy seeds on those plots of land, and they all, you know, grew into beautiful poppy flowers in the spring, which is awesome. And then we planted baby oaks on another date. We were given permission to move up in our intensity of planting. So we got to plant baby oaks. And so hopefully a beautiful oak grove will grow where we planted those oaks. And then finally, we recently did work at Los Arboles Middle School. I've been working at Los Arboles Middle School with an environmental science teacher. I've been working there for about 2 years now and volunteering to help restore the school garden. I'm personally passionate about this because I was able to go to Carmel Middle School, where we have the beautiful habitat and the Me Earth program. And so, you know, knowing how much, you know, learning outside and going into the habitat and doing science experiments, knowing how much that's done for me growing up and how much it's fostered my environmental science passion. I just love to be able to do this for other middle school students at Los Arboles. And so we had club members come, we planted, we spread mulch, and it was a really, really fun project to have members from the club, you know, come and help out. So just to kind of wrap it up, we really hope to continue to work with the city of Carmel. I think that would be a really awesome partnership for the club next year and hopefully in future years as well. And then we want to obviously continue local projects and partnerships, and hopefully we'll do a last beach cleanup and a last golf ball dive before the end of the year. And finally, I just kind of wanted to summarize my thoughts here. So I think it's easy to become stuck in one of two mindsets. The first is becoming wrapped up in the trivial buzz of day-to-day life and forgetting what is important and remembering to be grateful for where we live. I think it's easy to just, you know, get busy with commitments and social life and this and that. But I think it's important to just kind of check in and remember, oh my gosh, like we live here, like it's so amazing. And then the second mindset, I think it's becoming overwhelmed with the current state of our environment, and kind of carrying the weight of the current climate crisis on our shoulders. And I found myself stuck in both of these mindsets at separate times. But I think that's why I love like environmental clubs so much, because it really just encourages students like myself who really care just to feel like we're making a difference. And even if it's small, it's just so meaningful, and you get to connect with amazing people and meet other passionate students. And so, yeah, I've just been so grateful to be able to work with Mr. MB. He's been a great mentor, and just, you know, be part of this club for 4 years. So, yeah, thank you so much for hearing my thoughts. And I really hope that the club can work with you guys in the future.
Gwen, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh yes, it's been so fun to get to know you, and I think we can each see why Jason said earlier that you didn't have to be around Gwen very long before you got a sense of her enthusiasm and commitment. And given that all the work that you and the club do is very exciting, very inspiring, and I think it shows an amazing commitment to the environmental issues that weigh heavily on us as a committee, and certainly on you as a representative of the young people in our community. So thank you, beyond thank you. And best of luck at UC Santa Barbara.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's going to be a great ride, I'm sure.
I'm very excited.
Now we can open it up to questions that anyone who's attending might have.
Absolutely.
Anyone? Carrie?
Yeah, I've got some comments. Great job, Quinn. You know, your environmental club is making a difference. You are touching the lives of people, of all the kids at Carmel High, and increasing their awareness. So my hat's off to you and the club for making a difference and wanting to do that. All the projects you did are very impactful. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. I'm hoping that our group and your group can get together and continue working together. I just want to clarify one thing. I'm a golfer, and we really do not mean to hit balls in the water. Okay.
I know. I was just giving you. I really don't like that. I was giving them a hard time.
I know.
I respect the sport. I really do. I could never do it.
I just wanted to clarify that. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to Carrie's comments, not necessarily about the meaning and all that golf ball stuff, which is just a little bit of a mystery to me, but I'm really impressed by not only the breadth of your projects, you know, from planting trees and landscaping in Palo Corona Park to helping out at the Marina Middle School to fishing out the golf balls from the errant golfers. But what really struck me was the Climate Action Day, you know, getting out there and standing in a protest line and saying, this is what we care about. I think that shows some really great beginnings for your lives as mature adults. Right now, I would call you young adults. And so I really look forward to watching all of you. And I especially look forward to, this probably isn't the right one, but I especially look forward to the return of Jack Johnson and the concert that he might give on the beach of Carmel. So keep us all posted. Anyone else?
Ellen Gannon, I'm with Sustainable Carmel, and I just want to thank Quinn and Mr. MB for the pre-COVID times in which we worked together to show films at Carmel High, and look forward to
absolutely.
Thank you, and look forward to doing that in the future. And I also, for the Climate Protest Day, it was a lot of schools on the whole peninsula that were together for that, because I was part of coordinating all that, and that was really rewarding. And I think Carmel's lucky to have Carmel River School, because they have a strong environmental program, which already seeds you all before you go to Carmel High.
Absolutely.
And I want to say thank you to City Council for working with you and us and the different schools. Thank you.
Ellen, it was great to hear your voice, and we would love to get back to our pre-pandemic routines here soon with you. So please keep
Thank you. Thank you. This was a great presentation, and it was wonderful to be caught up with what all you all have been doing despite the pandemic, or maybe emboldened by the pandemic. You all are great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy?
Any more comments?
Yeah, I have a question, and a great presentation, and thanks Quinn and crew for all that you do for the surrounding areas. I had a question, I had heard just via secondhand that at the school that there's some requirement just for all the student body to give back contributions of working in the community. Can anybody talk to that? Is that true, or am I making it up?
What I'm aware of is that there is a requirement. It used to be of 60 hours of community service for every student at Carmel High. I think it's a little bit less now due to the pandemic, and a lot of nonprofits haven't been able to run at their full scale. But Mr. MB, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's the anticipation that it'll go back to that next year's 60 hours of community service by the time of graduation. And we have tons of students who end up with, upwards of 500 hours of community service. And so we say to always, send your opportunities our way, and we'll put them out there to the Carmel High student body.
Yeah, we actually put volunteer options at the bottom of the bulletin every single day. And so students can, go check that if they want to get some hours over the weekend or something.
Yeah, and so there's definitely a lot of area-based organizations that have volunteer opportunities. And I guess the big question is who do we send that information to? Is there a general email alias at the high school, or how does that happen?
Yeah, I'll put her name is Diana Vita. She puts all that information together, and I will put her email in the chat right now.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for everything you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Stuff.
It's Ellen again. I had one more thought. Congratulations on having the water bottle refilling stations at Carmel High. And I just want to put in a plug for the city of Carmel-by-the-Sea to, going forward, get some of them in the parks here in the city. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. I love that idea.
All right, we ready to move on?
Thank you guys so much. Yeah, thank you guys, Quinn and Jason, and we'll touch base soon.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Working with you.
You too. So the next thing on the agenda is this sort of odd item, and I'll give a little bit of an introduction. This review correspondence between Landwatch and AMBAG. A couple of, either last month or the month ago or 2 months ago, when we had AMBAG present us the greenhouse gas survey, Landwatch got a hold of that and has exchanged a couple of emails with AMBAG about sort of the methodology that they've been using in their numbers. And we as a committee are going to have to make a, give staff some direction at some point in the near future about what we think about these methodologies. And so what Carrie and I and Agnes and Evan thought was that we would sort of queue up this issue this month and maybe have, we could review the letters that were in the packet, my sort of really coarse interpretation of the letters, have some take some questions, maybe have a little bit of a discussion about what we think. And then next month we'd have a fuller discussion and sort of give direction to staff. And we're hoping there's some chance that by next month or the month after, some of the things we're going to talk about, there may be some cost differences involved in the consulting. And so we're hoping that maybe by the time we have this discussion, we'll have a view as to what those cost differences might be, but not 100% sure, but we'll see, we'll kind of see where we go. Sound good, Agnes? So what do? I hit the share screen button. This is the first time I've ever done this, and just kind of proceed.
Yeah, you have a share screen button showing up, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, but you're muted.
So let's see.
Oh, that's good.
Here we go. Should I share my screen or just that window, Agnes?
I did just a window.
Okay.
That worked okay for me.
Oh, great. So everybody can see that, I guess.
Yep.
Great.
Yep, you're good to go, Jeff.
Oh, you're muted. Yep, you're still muted. See if I can unmute.
Okay, here we are.
Okay.
So this is what I just talked about. We're going to talk about the two issues that Landwatch raised and have a brief discussion. I know there are a couple members of the public here. I see Libby, and I know there are a couple more. And I would especially like to hear from you. This is not a requirement, but if you have anything to say, sort of after this, would especially like to hear from you. The first issue that Landwatch raised, the first issue that Landwatch raised, and I believe that we had a somewhat robust discussion about this a couple of months ago, was the use of AMBAG's use of local streets only. So just to review, AMBAG generates these sort of coarse greenhouse gas reports for all three counties that AMBAG encompasses, as well as all the municipal jurisdictions within those counties. So they generate probably 30 or 35 of these reports. And so they're somewhat automatically generated. There's very little customization involved. And so the basis for the generation of these reports is something called the Highway Performance Monitoring System, which is either probably a Caltrans system that figures out how many miles cars drive on each of your local roads. So for example, this system, when it estimates the mileage inside of Carmel, only measures miles. So if you're coming down Carmel, so if you're coming from Seaside and you drive down to Ocean Avenue and you make a right turn at the stoplight, this system doesn't count your mileage until you're 2 blocks in, until you enter the city limits of Carmel. So that's the issue. Local roads rather than this origin destination model. So as Landwatch says in their email to AMBAG, a trip to downtown Carmel from Monterey would have the same emissions as a trip that started in Salinas or Soledad. And my sort of comment to that is it's also the same as a trip to Carmel that might come from San Francisco or Los Angeles. So the AMBAG model, the local road model doesn't, charge isn't the right word, but doesn't charge a lot of those VMTs for some of our visitors and some of our workers to the Carmel greenhouse gas inventory. Those miles get charged to the greenhouse gas inventory of, Seaside, of especially Monterey. Monterey is a perfect example because people just pass through Highway 1 on Monterey. And AMBAG and Landwatch takes a big issue with this for reasons we'll talk about in a second. The other issue that Landwatch surfaced was that this methodology changed in the year 2015 when Caltrans started using, I guess, Anya, so you can correct me, but I believe they started using satellite technology and GIS technology to track where cars were actually going. So they changed the methodology to make it more accurate. And as a result, between 2014 and 2015, the daily VMTs traveled within Carmel decreased by 44%. So as Landwatch points out, obviously we didn't, there was nothing major that happened in Carmel between 2014 and 2015. We didn't get train service. We didn't get a bus service. We didn't develop teleportation chambers or anything like that. Our miles just decreased by 44%. And Landwatch takes issue with that. And I think that shows up, this is sort of my note. I think that shows up in the difference between the two AMBAG reports between 2010 and 2015. These are numbers that were taken from our 2018 report, where we went from 14,000 plus tons of carbon dioxide every year to 7,800 tons of carbon dioxide every year, a decrease of 46%. Roughly the same as the decrease that we saw in the VMTs above. So everyone, I'll stop there for a second. Does anyone before I go on to the land wash letter, does anyone in the public or anyone on the committee have any questions about this? Because I think it's important that we understand this before we get to the next point. And I can't see everybody shout it out. Okay.
Yeah, I
heard someone.
They use a different methodology. I just wondered if you wanted to define those different methodologies. You talked about the one where they used GIS, but the previous one, was there any obvious thing that what they want to do is have a methodology that is an actual representation or as close a representation of actual activity. And this big difference brings into question, is the new methodology correct or is the old methodology correct? What about the two of them?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's a good question. And I would distinguish. So Michael's asking about the methodology change, not about the origin destination model. They're two very different issues. When I was talking to Agnes yesterday, these numbers, we kind of got a laugh out of these numbers that you see on the screen. 85,000 or let's say 47,250 VMTs. That's a daily VMT for Carmel. So our city is only 1 square mile, and we get the estimates that I've heard are we have about 2,000 people coming in and leaving our city this morning. So I'm not exactly sure, honestly, how we get to 47,000 VMTs for 2,000 people plus the 3,000 people that live here, unless people are simply getting in their cars and driving around and around and around the village, taking scenic roads. So I think my gut is that 47,000 is too high, but I think that we will, and so 85,000 obviously is really too high, but I think when we have a consultant on board, we'll be able to get to the bottom of those numbers. Does that sort of answer your question, Michael?
I just would, I don't really understand the methodology other than what you said. I mean, obviously there's this huge difference between these two numbers, but it sounds like you're even questioning the new methodology.
And Councilmember Barron and
personally, I question.
Amory might be able to provide.
Yeah, I can provide some insight if that would be helpful. That's something that the committee would be interested in.
Go ahead, Amory. I think, yeah.
So this HPMS methodology, what it does is that it attributes segments of roads throughout California to every jurisdiction in California. And once those segments of roads are attributed through modeling and traffic counts, it estimates the vehicle miles traveled on those miles of roads. And then they tally up all of the miles that you have in your jurisdiction, and it comes out with this final number, which is what we get to see. We don't get to see how the sausage is made, so to speak. From 2014 to 2015, when they introduced this GIS technology, to essentially, they did a reattribution of who the miles of roads belong to. And what we think happened, and again, we only see the final product, so it's very hard for us to know exactly what they did. What we think happened is that as part of this GIS methodology, they realized that some of your mileage of roads were actually not in Carmel. They were in unincorporated county. And so they removed the mileage of those and the associated VMT. And we think that the segments of roads that they removed were essentially the segments of the thoroughfares that you have, I think as Councilmember Barron mentioned earlier, that sort of as you enter in the village. And so we think that's why the reduction is so significant, if that makes sense.
A question for you, Amory. When we hire a consultant to sort of dig into this, will the consultant be able to sort of verify the veracity of 47,250 VMTs a day, or is that still going to be a black box to us?
So my experience with consultants is that they will come in, they will review the inventory, we sit down with them, we give them the number, we talk about these issues. And then when there is data that they're unsure about, they sometimes will move to a new methodology. And when I say sometimes, really, I mean most of the times for transportation, they use one of essentially their proprietary tools, and they would then run calculations and provide you with data to justify the new numbers. But to a large extent, it would be another tool that would be some version of a black box. And they would probably do it using this, not this local rows, but this origin destination methodology.
Right. So if we went with a consultant and decided to use sort of this origin destination methodology, the numbers that AMBAG presented to us in our draft 2018 report, so those numbers that go back to 2005 and 2010 and 2015, the consulting company would replace sort of the HPMS numbers, which are accurate or inaccurate or from the black box, with numbers that they would calculate and provide to us.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Actually, I have a quick question, and I see there's two questions, two hands raised. Does that mean that any future inventories that AMBAG's going to do for us would then not jibe with what we would do when we start working with our consultant on forecasting, and therefore would be less, at least on the vehicle miles traveled?
Yes, and that is the case for a number of communities that have created climate action plans that didn't use our transportation numbers. Really, the inventories that AMBAG then prepares are sort of on a parallel track. And the reason for that is because the local roads only looks at essentially all of the trips occurring on your local roads. The origin destination model methodology looks at trips that are either sort of start or end in Carmel, or they take 50% of the trips that begin or end in Carmel. So to give you an example, if you start in Carmel and end in Carmel under the origin destination, you sort of get 100% of that trip. But then if you, let's say, start in Carmel and end up in Seaside, you get 50% of that trip attributed to you. And by the same token, if you start in Seaside and end up in Carmel, Carmel would get 50% of that. As opposed to the local streets methodology, where essentially no matter where the trip is coming from, where it begins or ends, it's looking at all of the VMTs that occur on the local roads. So there are really two different ways of looking at transportation emissions in your city.
Okay. Libby? Had a question?
Yeah, no, I was just, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I was just trying to understand, and maybe Jeff, you can just recap why the 44% decrease, and then do you see, are we going to respond to Landwatch's letter saying that yes, we understand there's a discrepancy, and we're going to go about it to recalculate in this with new tools or new analysis?
I think I think that we've answered, and so I think we've answered I think the 44% decrease that happened between 2014 and 2015 is just because the black box changed.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that there's really anything that we can do other than to accept it and decide whether we're going to, what we're going to do about it. I think, Agnes and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think that correcting for the 2014-2015 issue. So sort of the way that Caltrans generated these local road miles, these VMTs. I think that's a much easier issue, much easier correction than doing the correction for the origin destination model, which would require a model rather than, you know, just sort of a black box that we can rely on. As far as getting back to Landwatch actually hasn't sent the city any correspondence at all. So right now we're gonna finish reviewing the correspondence in a second. Right now, all the correspondence Landwatch is using its is using this correspondence to, and you know, and Amory will appreciate this, to sort of push AMBAG, which would result in sort of changes in the way that AMBAG sort of either calculates its data or presents its data or advises city to use its data as such. So we'll just, I'll leave it.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't see people.
Yeah, Nancy had a question too. Oh, Nancy, you're muted.
Okay, so given so what's the pluses and the minuses to having this decrease now be the benchmark that's coming out of this organization? So obviously we're always looking for as accurate and transparent a number as we can. I get that because we don't want to be, you know, intentionally swaying our numbers on our side of things for any reason. We just want accurate and consistent measurements, you know, hopefully time period after time period as our goal. And if I was wrong on that, correct me. But what's the advantage or disadvantage of this number going down? That I didn't hear yet in this session.
I think the issue, Nancy, is that so you're looking at the slide and imagine that the 2014 number is really the 2005 number, which is sort of our benchmark number. And the 2015 number is really the 2018 number, which is where we are. So using those two numbers, that decrease of 44%, you know, according to those two numbers, we have made a huge stride in our greenhouse gas emissions between 2005 and 2018, even though we haven't done anything. So it's sort of like the first number from 2014 is like, they're like apples and oranges, or they're like big apples and little apples. And we need to use a model that measures those two things on the same scale. Does that make sense? So right now it gives the impression that we have decreased our greenhouse gas emissions by 45%, but we really haven't. Does that?
So they can't rerun the numbers against the historical inputs?
That's correct.
And re-level it?
The statement that you made is correct. They're sort of the black box changed and we can't go back there. We can't go back, or I guess AMBAG can't go back and rerun the 2014 numbers using the 2015 black box.
Got it.
That's what okay.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Lynette?
Do we understand why that can't happen? It just seems inconceivable to me that if there's a black box that we can't use that, or whoever has access to it, that way we can't use that to recalibrate.
But it's a black box.
Well, I know it's a black box, but somebody did or will or should have access to making sense of these numbers, because I remember personally when we saw these numbers initially, it was like, holy cow, look at what's happened here. This is amazing. And it was so incredibly misleading when we understand, you know, the rejiggering of the black box, if you will. But I just find it incomprehensible that we can't have a way to make real sense of this so that we know what the actual comparators are.
So I think in the letter, Amory, are you still there?
Yes.
I think in the letter that Landwatch, that AMBAG sent to Landwatch, I'm doing this from memory, AMBAG stated that they couldn't or wouldn't, I think it was just couldn't go back and rerun the 2005 numbers. Is that correct, Amory?
So that's partly correct. Essentially, what occurs is we use the reports that use this HPMS data. It's a report that gets published by Caltrans for the state, for every jurisdiction in the state every year. And they essentially, we just get a PDF file with the final numbers that they publish publicly. And they are not going to change the numbers retroactively. So the numbers are going to stay as they are. What Landwatch was asking was whether or not AMBAG could make assumptions based on the numbers we currently have to modify them in order to account for the discrepancy. And what we answered is that we are not willing to undertake this ourselves, because when there is sort of these large swing in emissions that we witness, and you try to change the emissions to account for perceived error, it can introduce further errors. Essentially, you never know how much you need to correct, and it means that every single inventory from there on out will need to be corrected, which has a potential for just introducing even more errors, essentially.
So we're good, Lynette? I mean, we're not good, but you're...
No, exactly. I mean, we're totally not good, because it really ends up sounding like the Caltrans numbers are mysterious, and there's no way that AMBAG would either be able to or be willing to go back to Caltrans to have a deeper understanding of how these numbers initially were derived and what changes caused the 44% apparent decrease. So I find it really unsatisfying. I understand that it is what it is, but I find it extremely unsatisfying.
Okay.
I would just add that I think we need to separate this question about whether we can restate the old data, the old black box. That's AMBAG's telling us they can't do that, which is, I can understand why they can't, because they don't have the details to do it. But I don't think they're telling us to use the data as is. So we should separate those two things. Yes, we can't restate it, but B, what are we going to do? Well, I don't think in any stretch we would use the data just when we know it's not scaled properly. So I think that's a separate question. I think AMBAG is suggesting that we take it on, and I think we could do better by simply ignoring the number or using 2015 as our base and taking off 15% or something simplified. We'd be much, much closer to the truth. So I think we can take that on as a jurisdiction independent of AMBAG. So I just think the point I'm trying to bring up is I think there's two things here and we should keep them separate.
Yeah, and I think that second question about what the jurisdiction should do, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's what we're going to continue this discussion next month, and have that exact conversation once everybody can sit with this for a month, and let it sort of percolate back in everybody's head. So I'll go on. And I think most of this probably we've already talked about. AMBAG stated in their letter to Landwatch that the inventories, as Scott was just talking about, are a tool to start the conversation about emissions, and that they comply with the protocols, are consistent across years and jurisdictions. And I think this goes back to what Amory was saying. If Amory won't hit me if I paraphrase it. I think it's okay to have a bad set of numbers if you know why they're bad. I think if we understand, from my perspective, if we understand that our numbers are flawed because of this change, so for example, between 2014 and 2015, or because of the modeling technique used, I think that's okay. I think it's, I think that, we know, I think to me, it's the question of we know what we don't know, and that's always better than not knowing what you don't know. So, it's not a great situation, but we know where we are. And then these are just some more comments that AMBAG made in their response. The data is readily and uniformly available for every year, so we can look across jurisdictions and see what's going on. And AMBAG did acknowledge that the black box changed in 2015, and these are some comments that they made back. Landwatch did respond back to AMBAG, and I think this is something that we should talk about. And I'll just read this. The critical consequence of an in-boundary approach to a greenhouse gas inventory is that cities would have no accountability and no incentives to mitigate transportation greenhouse gas emissions generated as a consequence of local government decisions. So if we were to use a local road only methodology, that doesn't, so to use a really trite example, that doesn't incentivize the city to get more of our day workers onto public transportation, because those day workers that are driving in rather than using public transportation, so little of their VMTs count towards our inventory. So that there's no incentive for us in the form of this climate action plan. And I think that's what Landwatch is saying. And then the methodology change we've talked about quite a bit already. So more, I think that's the last slide.
Can I ask one question here, Jeff?
Yeah.
I think they also talked about the CEQA compliance. And I'm just wondering if that's important to us, or that we agree with that, or what your take is on the CEQA compliance issue as part of that same topic on the VMT methodology.
I guess Anya's is smiling. I guess that's another long discussion. That's a much longer discussion than this discussion about sort of the legal issues around what it means to have a sort of a CEQA certified climate action plan, or I think what our attorney called it was a qualified climate action plan versus just a climate action plan, and what the city stands to gain from having a CEQA certified plan versus a non-CEQA certified plan, and what the cost differences are or not. The CEQA certification process, one option which I think is available is to go through the process without having a CEQA certified, and then because that would be a somewhat arduous process, and come back to it next year. We're trying, one of the considerations I think that, Carrie and I have talked about, in addition to the cost, the two issues are the cost and the timing. We really do want to finish this project by next summer so we can meet our deadline. And we really want to be conscious of the amount of money that we spend in doing it. And so the CEQA certification would require time and money. And it's the CEQA certification part my guess is it's the CEQA certification part that would be most interesting to Landwatch, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
But we can talk about that more offline. I can tell you what I know without taking up everybody's time. And so to close, these are the sort of questions we'll have more of a discussion about next month. Should we continue to use the local streets only methodology, or develop, with the help of consultants, this origin destination model? So that's question number one. And then question number two is basically revise or don't revise the VMTs. And I think, we've had a good discussion today. We had a good discussion last month or the month before about this. Amory has provided some guidance here about what we can do or how they do it. And so we'll just, without prejudicing anything, I think those are the two questions. I think also, yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. for the time being. So any more comments or questions? Agnes, do you have anything, you want to add anything or?
I think that summarized the issues fairly well. And I think based on the conversation that I've heard so far, I'm hearing, an inclination towards adjusting to 2005 numbers somehow. I don't know that I've heard an inclination yet towards, local street methodology versus origin destination. There's benefits to both. I think origin destination is kind of where a lot of cities are going towards. I think Evan just kind of checked before the meeting, and it looked like Monterey used an origin destination model also for their climate action plan. I know San Luis Obispo has used origin destination. So it appears to be the direction in which cities are going. So from that standpoint, I think that would be potentially sort of where we would want to go.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think given our economy, given the way that Carmel works, with the number of workers that live outside, the number of employees that live outside of the city, and the way our tourist economy works, I think that that's certainly more accurate for a measurement of our impact. I think that's certainly true. Carrie, put Carrie on the spot.
Well, I mean, I think that we get a lot of visitors to our village. And, from a personal aspect, there's days I don't even use my car. So I think a lot of locals are not driving around much, but it's how do you measure the impact of these visitors? And I think that concerns me. And and I'm not quite sure the answer to that. And that's where I think the consultant is going to be helpful.
Lynette?
Do we see that as being one of the questions that we pose to the consultant to ask for that kind of guidance? Okay, good. Because my inclination would be the origin destination, just because it seems like a more fulsome story. But I think that I would certainly like to have some expert guidance on that.
All right. Everybody good? So let's see, stop sharing my screen. And
I think you had one more slide, Jeff, was the last slide. I think.
No, it just said questions.
Oh, okay. I think we covered that one.
Michael, you're up. Did we lose him? Nope.
No, I just gotta get unmuted and get back on my video going. So you can hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I didn't make a slide presentation for this document because I didn't think it was pretty short. But I believe at our last meeting, the question about gray water came up. And so I looked on the county's website, and in your packet, you have the policy that the county has. And it's a pretty straightforward document. In the introduction, it talks about how wastewater treatment systems, on-site wastewater treatment systems, can be helpful in conserving drinking water. And so what they've defined gray water as untreated wastewater that comes from bathroom sinks, showers, and washing machines, as opposed to black water, which comes from toilets, kitchen sinks, and dishwashers. And the purpose of the document basically is to provide definitions for the wastewater, and then also to create a permitting process and definitions for the types of systems that are designed. And they have, so they have defined the types of systems. The first system, which is a closed washer system, this is just a gray water system utilizing the single domestic clothes washing machine. It doesn't require any permitting. Then they have what's called a simple system. It's a gray water system serving 1 or 2 family dwellings. It's got a discharge of about 250 gallons per day. And then they have a complex system, which is over 250 gallons. And then they have a treated gray wastewater system. This is where non-potable water is treated or collected and treated on site for other direct use. And so the permitting, they don't require any permitting for a closed washer system, and the other systems do require it. Then they go into the design of systems and the permitting process. So they've got a policy and a permitting process in place for this, and pretty simple document to read. The other thing that I looked into is to see what the city had in their municipal ordinances, and they have under the municipal ordinance 15 section, they have a section which just is entitled Water Recovery Systems for Landscaping. And right under that, it refers to some changes that were made. And Evan sent me the ordinance changes. I had a little trouble finding those. I looked those over and it looked like the one 92.4, it refers to installing rainwater recovery systems in all new buildings or substantially remodeled ones. And it kind of expands the definition of where you can collect that. It talks about gutters and things like that. And maybe Evan can speak to that language. I think the intention was just to provide a definition. The way it reads, it kind of sounds like maybe they were thinking about, or having it installed on all new buildings and significant remodels. So maybe Evan could provide some clarification on that.
Yeah, we don't have this section in the code currently, but my reading on the old ordinance from 92 is that it just meant to, I think it has to do with catching water and keeping it on site. It says systems shall include but may not be limited to gutters, downspouts, area drains, street runoff recovery basins. All systems shall meet the approval of the building official and city forester. So to me, it doesn't really sound like it's talking about, actual catchment systems, but it's just more keeping water on site, consistent with what we currently have, which is Agnieszka's area of expertise.
Yes, we have some pretty tight requirements for drainage retention on site, but that does not require rainwater capture for reuse necessarily.
Yeah, I
it's
think
great if people do it, but it's not
I think
required.
when it talks about gutters and downspouts, may just be directing it into landscape areas as opposed to letting it run off onto a driveway or something.
How many of these systems do you know of? Has anyone in Carmel installed sort of an industrial sized rainwater system, like measured in the thousands of gallons versus the dozens of gallons?
I know at least one residential, and I guess Carrie also.
How many gallons do you store, Carrie?
I store about 1,200 gallons that one from rainwater, and then one from a 200 gallon. I have about an 800 gallon rainwater catchment that I use for irrigation. And I have about a 250 gallon that I use from an ice machine drainage. So.
I know myself at the Planning Commission, I know we reviewed one residence that had an on-site storage cistern, and they were collecting water off of a metal roof that they presented and said that it had a greater propensity to create condensation, the type of metal roof. And then they were, of course, collecting that and then their gutters, and then directing the flow into the cistern through the downspouts. That's I can only remember one of those that we reviewed at planning in my tenure. So, but that's sort of different from gray water in a gray water system where you have this definition between gray and black water. But I thought it would, I'd look into the Carmel ordinances and see what they had, and that was the only thing I found. So that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. A couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about, which in fact we're going to talk about in a minute, when we were talking about PG&E, we mentioned sort of proactive hookups for, like, for example, electric vehicles. So the possibility of putting something in our municipal code that required new homes to be EV ready, or something like that, or to be battery storage pack ready, depending on, what direction our report takes and whatnot. Do you think there's a place for doing basic things for gray water too, or is it just too much into left field to, like, houses could plumb their gray water and black water separately, just to make it easy in the future? To sort of cut the gray water pipe and figure out what to do with it. Is that, what do you think about that? You're a builder and you've seen a lot of stuff at the Planning Commission. What do you think about requirements in sort of that area?
Well, it kind of breaks down into two areas. You've got, you have ordinances and requirements, and then you have incentives. And I think a big incentive for people to look at the gray water is going to be the frequency of drought and also the cost of water. And as all of us know, the cost of water is going up dramatically. I mean, my water bill's it's probably doubled in the last 10 years. It's not at the point right now where I would think about putting in a gray water system, but if it doubled again, I certainly would think about that. And it's something that, as a builder, I know it wouldn't be that hard to retrofit a building, because most buildings, all the plumbing is either under the house or over the house. Typically, it's under the house. And so it's in a big open space and you can get at it. So it wouldn't be something which would be a huge cost. Whether or not, we as a city should make this a requirement, that would require a lot of discussion. It just depends how heavily if we were really heavily impacted by a lack of water, I think there would be a lot of motivation to have more discussion about it and possibly have some regulation involved.
Yeah, and I would submit that that's exactly what our job is here, is to sort of have that discussion, amongst the 6 or 8 of us and figure out whether we wanted to make a recommendation, in our final report, whether we wanted to make a recommendation to the council to either implement regulations or further investigate regulations, or just drop it altogether. So, Carrie, what do you?
I'm sorry. What do I think?
What do you think this falls within our purview?
I think the higher water costs are going to drive the necessity of doing this. So I'm not sure if we should go there on the gray water issue.
Do you think it's a subject that we should at least talk about, or who, I guess my question for you, Carrie, would be, if we're not going to talk about it, if this committee is not going to talk about it, where exactly is that discussion going to happen? It's certainly not going to happen at the council.
No.
So,
I mean, it would be at the Planning Commission level.
I might.
For planning in the future of, building requirements. I think it goes back to the Planning Commission, doesn't it?
Well, we could make a recommendation to the Planning Commission to, I don't know.
I think Jeff's question about if not us, then who is really the right question, because the Planning Commission has a lot of things that it's responsible for, and without some impetus to focus either on rainwater catchment or black water system or gray water systems, I don't know why the Planning Commission would take that up on its own without some either coordinated effort between us and them, or some directive from City Council, or some kind of grassroots thing, which I cannot imagine happening.
So I would just add a couple comments. We tend to be in the group of people that are more aware of these things, and none of us actually knew until we looked it up what the local requirements were for gray water catchment. So I think there's really a lack of even just letting people know that this is out there, that you can do boundary to landscape without getting a permit. I wasn't sure about that before. So even getting the information out there, I think would be helpful for the city to do that. I could see incentives being also, if the city wanted to start with incentives before going to requirements. That's usually kind of a way to set, to get people used to an idea before we force them into it. So those are two thoughts that I have regarding, the gray water and even the rainwater catchment, because I think it's just not at the top of people's minds.
I think, part of the mission statement was to educate the public. That was a big discussion we started. And I think this, making the public aware of this policy is something that this committee should do in its report. And it directly, the way this topic came up is talking about drought and water. And so in the section of our report, we should, make that part of it. It's a way to mitigate, the impacts of climate change. So that, we should do that. Whether it goes eventually to become a regulation, I don't know. But at this point, I think it's always better to start the conversation with a carrot than it is with a stick. And so an incentive, there's a lot of ways it could be incentivized for applicants to do this on substantial remodels or new homes. And so that would be, I think that should be a goal of the city initially. But I think for this committee, I think it should be part of our report. We should just include this in there. So as Anya said, people are aware of it, and then they know that there's a policy about it. There's specific permitting requirements, and there's also design criteria that's there, and it's available.
I think to that, so I agree with what you said, Michael. I think that we might consider taking it half a step further. I think that you mentioned possibly an incentive program, and I think it would fall within the purview of our committee to sort of sketch out an incentive program. Try to figure out what projects never finish if they never start, and developing an incentive program would be sketching out the outlines of an incentive program to sort of accommodate these things would be a start to figuring out how to get these systems installed in town. And so I see a lot of heads going up and down. So I do think that it would be a worthwhile exercise between now and sort of a year from now to have, as part of our report, to recommend an incentive program to the powers that be, whether it's the council or staff or the planning commission or whoever it is, and say, just to spitball something, would say, hey, the city should spend $5,000 a year and incentivize rainwater systems. And here's how we think we could spend $5,000 a year. I think that sort of forward-looking thinking, as was sort of exhibited by the Carmel High young adults a little bit ago. I think that that's good work. I
agree. I like the incentive approach rather than the mandate approach.
Yeah, great.
I would just also second what Anya said about the awareness and education component. So not just incentives, but there might be some separate tracks around education and making these opportunities more aware to people.
Nancy had a question or a comment?
Yep. So this is ancillary, but kind of building on what you were saying with the incentives for gray water. Creating some guidance or nudging for those of us who haven't done solar yet is also something that seems, parallel to this current discussion. So that's greenfield for us, for our home, because we just haven't addressed it yet. But if we're wanting to nudge people down that path of creating education, awareness, information, and maybe there is regulation there too, I don't know. But we probably need to mention that too if you're going to mention this one. For the hopper.
Yeah, we did. In fact, we're going to talk about that exact subject, Nancy, at the end of the meeting, because we did talk about, I guess in this case, the stick approach about requiring homes to be EV ready or solar ready. We talked about that a couple months ago.
I was just going to say to wrap it up, we could think about incentives for this type of program and others, and then maybe have a discussion in the future about that.
So why don't I, if Michael, if you're okay, can we sort of put you in charge of this discussion, and maybe you and I can talk about it in the next couple of weeks?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've got lots of time to figure this out, but. So any more questions? I'm sorry, I haven't been very good about asking the public, but Nancy, thank you for appearing. Any more questions or comments on this from Nancy? Did your hand just go up again, or maybe not? Okay. So should we move on to? So we're all set. So I'll talk to Michael, and then we'll figure out what to do with respect to this. Okay. Provide comments, approve summary sheets for AMBAG, greenhouse gas inventory presentation, and Central Coast Community Energy presentation. And we have our 2 staff members to do this. You want me to pick one of you to go first?
Sure, Evan can go first.
I
like that.
Off the agenda, I'm trying to find it.
I might start with, did anybody have any comments or questions about anything that was in either of the summary sheets?
I did not.
I'm almost there.
Well, I can start.
I got it.
Oh, you're there? Okay, all right.
Yeah. So with this was a summary of the 2018 draft greenhouse gas inventory summary that Emery presented at the February meeting. I'm happy to hear that no one has any questions or comments right off the bat, just because that makes it pretty easily. but in general, it's just a summary of the presentation, identified some key terms. One thing that I might want to change myself is I didn't really think there was a hazard, but I guess and I did not applicable, I guess the overall hazard is greenhouse gas emissions. I was more thinking as being just an asset itself. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts about that, but that's an easy change that can be made. In terms of the points that I made, a lot of it just is mostly background. And then I go into the inventory findings, a lot of which we already discussed earlier in the meeting. Just the discrepancies between the years of the inventory, and then also the issues with the change in methodologies. Other than that, everything was very straightforward and laid out in a clear manner in the presentation, which made it very easy to translate into a summary sheet. That's about all I have. And
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about in your sheet, you talk about the difference between the 2045 and the 2050 goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know, speaking only for myself, how to make that decision. I don't know. It seems to me that I could just as easily flip a coin and say 2045 or 2050.
Yeah, and that's my.
We had sort of decided to use 2030 as our first benchmark, and then the second one was a little bit unclear. And I was wondering if you and sort of planning staff, I guess, and I guess I would include Agnes in this, have some direction for us as to, I guess we'll have to iron this out when we hire the consultant. We'll have to figure out what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, so there's really no wrong answer with our long-term goal. The 2030 goal is there, that's set. Between 2045 and 2050, if we go with 2050, which is what's the reduction? 80% reduction from 1990 levels. That's the goal right now. So if we do that, we aren't wrong. If we go for the 2045 target, which is zero carbon neutral, then that's more advantageous, but that's not required yet. The CARB still needs to update their scoping plan. So because they haven't done it, we don't know if they're going to actually adopt that or not. So if we're doing this today, it doesn't matter. If we want to be more aggressive and go for carbon neutral, I think that's great. But the safer bet would just go with the goal that's established today. And it just comes down to a decision that we have to make. There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, that's another one where I might look at other cities and what they've done. Kind of depends. It runs the gamut, but there's some of the newer climate action plans tend to go with the 2045 carbon neutrality, and I think that's just partly for aspirational purposes. The other thing is, if we're not doing a CEQA certified plan, it's a little less, potentially a little less, our actual goal might be a little less important, because if we don't get it CEQA certified, maybe it's not as big a deal if it's meets one or the other. But if the new goal gets adopted in 2022, then we will have an out-of-date goal.
So right now we could have the plan CEQA certified if we used either 2045 or 2050. But in 2022, that may not be the case. We may have missed the boat. If we use 2050 and then at that point we're required to use 2045.
Yeah, my understanding is it depends what comes out of the scoping plan. that the Air Resources Board puts together.
And
I just wonder, in terms of the amount of funding in the governor's new budget that is allocated to climate change and climate change plan support and the expectations there, if we can't imagine easily that the 2045 year is going to be the new standard in 2022. It just seems to me that that's pretty likely.
I would agree.
I think it's very likely.
Yeah.
But again, we're working off an assumption. But again, it does seem like it is going that way.
Right.
Maybe we could have this, it's good that we're having this discussion now. When is the appropriate time to make this decision? When we have a consultant, or is the consultant just going to, is the consultant capable of providing it, does it matter? Is it just should we just make this decision independent of the consultant because the process is the same either way? It's just that the timeline and the goals are different, or is there some other difference that matters?
I wanted to add another point. Climate change seems to be gaining speed as it's accelerating, sort of like a car going downhill. And if you are calculating on a flat road, and in reality, you're going downhill, it's going to be much faster than we anticipate. Because there's more, like the ice caps melting and more carbon that's being released from the ice caps and I just wanted to interject that perspective.
That's a good point.
So I was curious, I just looked to see if there was maybe a draft scoping plan out. There's not yet. They're actually holding a public meeting today to consider new committee members for it. So I was hoping we might get some insight into what's going to be written into the document, but it seems like they're just getting their committee wrapped up for it.
I'm hearing sort of a general consensus on 2045, but I'm not, is anybody going to do this? When we talk about 2045, everybody's going to nod their head yes. So my request then, Evan, would be that we I think it would be appropriate then to sort of take this document that you've put together and change it a little bit and just adopt the 2045 goal. Like, let's not screw around. Let's just make a decision and if we don't need to talk about it again next month, let's just make the decision and sort of move forward and hope it's not too bad. Too difficult.
Again, if something changes with the scoping plan, we can always, take a more aggressive goal. So.
Well, 2045 is the more aggressive goal.
It is. Yeah. I'm saying if something changes along the way.
If it's like 2040 instead of 2045.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea, 2045.
I'm a little worried about our ability to meet that goal, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it has been a challenge for the other cities who tried to do that. But
it is what it is. I mean, it is what it is.
Right. Okay, and then the other summary sheet was on the 3CE presentation. I think, I think the message they were trying to get out there, I think, was that even with the goal of providing 100% clean energy, I think by 2030, we're still going to have natural gas on the grid because of the times of use of power, and they want people to understand that we're still going to have emissions associated with that natural gas use. And I think that drives the point to everyone that we can't just rely on the power supplier to get us out of, emissions issues, that, conservation and doing what we can locally still makes a difference in terms of emissions, that it's not going to be all on the power supplier. I think they were trying to say this in a diplomatic way.
Yeah, because power supply is only one, is only like one of the three big areas of our emissions, right? There's power supply, there's transportation, and there's, sort of natural gas usage.
Right, and even with power supply, within power energy use within buildings, there's conservation that can happen, and there's installing solar on buildings, etc. So we can do more at a local level, even if the power supplier is going towards more green energy.
Right. Well, I'm sure we'll run against all that.
And they also mentioned that they had a REACH code incentive for municipalities who want to adopt REACH codes. And we may want to discuss at some point whether we want to do this for Carmel and what type of REACH code we would want to adopt, because there's different ones out there.
So that would be dependent on the consulting work that we do with our emissions, right? I mean, presumably we would adopt a code, assuming if we were in the right frame of mind, in the right mood, we would adopt a code that allowed us to meet our emissions targets, right? Whatever that is.
That would help us get there, yes.
Yeah.
I think it can also be independent. We could just adopt REACH codes as we see fit. They might not be quantifiable actions, but I guess they could be, good measure efforts.
And it also seems like this is another place where the educational component becomes important, that, whatever communication plan we eventually develop, that these educational components become really a critical part of that overall communication plan. And especially in terms of conservation.
Yeah, I agree with all that. One thing I would say is to Evan's point about we could do this on our own, as a council member, I would say that, REACH codes are a little bit of a reach. And having, doing this greenhouse gas inventory work beforehand, before we went to the council with a recommendation on a REACH code that we might enact, I think that would bolster our argument for doing that by a huge amount. I think that there might be some pretty drastic things coming, and I think we need to have our ducks in a row before we take that step. So, okay, should we move on to the last thing? The last thing on the agenda is to review this summary sheet that I put together, which was about the electrical grid. And this is just a summary of all the notes that I took during the presentation last month. So should I go through it, or do we want to just, should we just take comments if there are comments? I would make, so I'll get the conversation started. There are a number of outstanding issues. There are 5 outstanding issues on the sheet. Most of those, 3 of those, I have started a conversation with our PG&E rep, and I will have some answers for those at some point in the near future. In terms of what the local causes of power failure are. So what do you all think? Like what do you think, if we go down to the committee actions, at the end, the prevention was tree trimming and maintenance. And the second thing was explore the possibility of undergrounding select or all utility lines with property assessments. Carrie, what do you think about that?
It's darn scary. It is darn scary. Yeah, I don't.
Do you think it's scary because of the scope of the project, or do you think it's scary because of the cost and the assessment nature of the project?
Both, I think. We'd all love to do it, but trying to, I don't know what the capacity of PG&E is. If the whole city of Carmel decided to do this, could they, how long would it take for them to underground everything if we said, yes, let's do it and let's assess the properties?
So I asked when I had my first conversation with Gina Arnold a few weeks ago, I did ask her that exact question.
Okay.
And her answer is, you won't know until you get us to scope out the project. Like they literally will not tell, as you can imagine,
right.
They're not going to tell us, they won't tell you anything until, the cost that she said she always uses is $3 million a mile. And we have 20 miles of roads. So it's a $60 million project, give or take one order of magnitude, I guess. That's pretty much all of the information that she would give us. I think, the sort of way to proceed is to make a formal request, but my guess is that would require a deposit. I thought Bob was on the call on this. Do you remember a couple of years ago when we had a really brief discussion about this at the council, what the process would be for doing that?
There's a couple different options. There's the Rule 20A is what I think we've used that maybe potentially for the downtown. So that applies to the public roads that are sort of larger, that serve larger number of vehicles or have a scenic value or that sort of thing. So there's some funding for Rule 20A, but that's not enough to cover the whole city by a long shot. And then there's a couple of other ways to get this done. It's a very complicated process. You have to create a special district. It's multiple years of, even Rule 20A is like a, 5 to 10 year planning process before you even start breaking ground. And so I'm assuming that would be sort of the same. A 10-year planning process would be a solid, it would be at least that probably if you wanted to do the whole city. So.
Well, is there a way to prioritize either neighborhoods or specific areas of town so that it doesn't seem like it is as gargantuan as it might initially feel, but that the long-term objective is full undergrounding, but that we agree that because of the scope and nature of the mission, that it needs to be done in strategic pieces. And I don't know what those priorities would be. I'm not suggesting any, but it feels like it might be smart of us to think of it not just as a whole piece, but as sections of the whole piece in order to make it manageable.
Like my street?
Well, yeah. But I just feel like there probably are areas of town where it would make sense for us to start. And I don't know if it's north to south, east to west, neighborhood related, downtown, or I don't know what that is. But it just feels like it might be, especially if there's a 10-year horizon to this, which I think if we thought of it in those terms, it would show the council a level of responsibility in our thinking, that we don't view it as being something, oh, let's just call PG&E and they'll start work tomorrow. So I feel like that might be a wise approach.
Ellen, so I saw Ellen's hand go up first.
Actually, that was left over from last time, but
Okay.
I do have something, two things. I just know in the past history, PG&E has been very reluctant to pursue this. So I just want us to know that we're going into a reluctant dragon. And secondly, I was just going to comment on the winds that it seems this year we've had winds much more than I remember any other years. And I was on a Zoom call with Marin County and Sonoma County people for a poetry group, and they were having extreme winds. So I don't think the winds are specific to us. I think it's something that's happening in a large portion of this state. I just wanted to interject that into the conversation.
Meredith, I think you were next.
Yeah, hi. The only thing I want to say is this. For years and years, I've heard these discussions about people wanting to put power lines underground, and it's always been the same conversation about the millions and millions of dollars, and every year passes, that number of millions goes up and up. And what I really want to say is my daughter happens to live on the East Coast, where all of the power, all of the lines are underground. And the beauty of that is with the storms they have, she lives near the right ocean over there on the right side. And there's never a concern or worry about having any outages. I mean, that's such a clear slate that all of the issues surrounding having overhead power lines, et cetera, and plus the maintenance by them on the utility companies, which is cost-saving measure. So, I mean, it's almost like if you think about wanting to do it, bite the bullet and do it, because the benefits seem to be out there, but it's a big nut to crack, no question about it. But the benefits for having no worries about power outage and the residuals from that, I think, need to be in the quantitative mix of all that. So I just wanted to share that with y'all. Thank you.
Thank you. Libby?
Yeah, my comment was, I think, seconding what Lynette said about maybe doing it in certain phases. And let's say maybe the commercial zone where there's essential services like the police, fire, and other services that would be important for communication and safety might be a way to do it. And I'm also wondering if there's other cities in our area that have done this undergrounding and done it as a phased project, or have it, could assist us with giving some advice on their approach. That's all.
The only city I know of that has undertaken a massive project is San Diego. And they tax, they have a kilowatt hour tax. I think it's like 1 or 2 cents a kilowatt hour to underground all the lines in San Diego. It's, from my research a year ago, it's a moderately contentious process. because people want to clamor. I mean, we saw what people did for vaccines. Imagine what people are going to do to have their power lines undergrounded. So they have a really complicated process for assigning underground districts to the various basically city council person districts. That's exactly how the project works. And it's a 100-year project. It's not a slow thing. There were a couple of comments about undergrounding downtown. Downtown is mostly already undergrounded. That was what the Rule 20A or 20B, whichever one it is. That's what those funds were used for back in the 80s. I think it was downtown and 8th Avenue and Scenic. So that's why the power lines on Scenic are underground and the downtown area is undergrounded. And I don't think there's a tremendous amount of money left in that account. I thought there was like $1 million or something, which would get basically would do the part of the lines in front of my house. I think that's all the money that was left. Lynette, to me, brought up an interesting thing. She was talking about priorities, and we just said, I just indicated that I think all of the sort of essential services are really taken care of. I think one of the things that I asked when I talked to PG&E a couple of weeks ago was to try and figure out which of the lines were most at risk for causing sort of widespread outages. If that's the focus of this committee, that would be what we would do. It's interesting, a couple of minutes ago, we had a discussion about incentives for gray water systems or rainwater systems. We could certainly have an incentive program for undergrounding power lines too, but it would be 3 orders of magnitude more money. And I'm not sure, we'll pay 10% of your costs if you want to have the lines undergrounded in front of your home. But I'm not sure where, short of actually doing an assessment, I honestly don't see I'm going to watch Carrie to see what her face looks like when I say this. I don't see any will of the council to put $500,000 into an incentive fund for undergrounding power lines. I mean, I don't think that's the way this is necessarily going to happen.
Yeah, but I agree with that. Right now, we're trying to put money away for unfunded pension liability and reserves.
Right.
I don't think we have much money after all that to set aside for that undergrounding topic. I agree.
Ellen mentioned that she thought PG&E was reluctant to do this, and that's actually not my experience. There's an undergrounding project, as I mentioned, going on Scenic. They're undergrounding 2 power poles worth of power lines, I think, on Scenic, but the not undergrounded part, sort of north of 8th Avenue. If you take a walk down there, you'll see the new trench. I think maybe some of the AV line, the telecommunications lines are still up, but I think it's almost done. I think that project is almost done. It was paid for by a homeowner down there. And I think the project below me on San Antonio is well underway, or not well underway, but it's in the planning process. So I don't think PG&E is reluctant as long as you're willing to pay them.
Can I just ask, and forgive my ignorance on this, but Michael, for new builds and substantial remodels, is there a requirement to do underground power?
There's a trigger mechanism. Evan would have to speak to that. I'm not exactly sure. Basically, when these in building, it's only undergrounded from the pole to your house.
Right.
Yeah, it's not, so the power poles are still there.
Yes, okay. No. But there is something.
Yeah, there's a trigger point, I'm pretty sure, but Evan would have to.
Yeah, maybe he knows. The dollar amount. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the dollar amount is, but once the project reaches a certain valuation, then you have to underground, again, from the power line to the house. It's not the full pole going underground.
Right, thank you.
I had a question of Jeff. You kind of mentioned it a little bit in your first part of your report, and that is getting data from PG&E about where where the stress points are, and that could be mapped on a GIS map.
Right.
And then we could get a more significant understanding of where the problems are. And I think ultimately, whichever way we suggest, about this where we could, that would provide some data so people could really, have a better understanding of what's actually going on. I mean, I know everybody hates to have their power go out, but it may not be happening that often in parts of the community, I mean, it's, it's a horrible inconvenience. Basically, modern life stops when the power goes off. But, how, where it's happening, where it's localized, where are the weak points in the electric grid, that runs through our town. I think that's something that'd be good to know.
Yeah, I think that goes back to a comment that Meredith made. It reminds me of the comment Meredith made about the power staying on in the East Coast. And I would remind Meredith that, 10 years ago or however long ago, when Sandy came through, the power went off, in 4 states, in spite of the fact that all of Manhattan is undergrounded. They didn't have any power at all. And I think that some of what we see here, Michael, when we talk about these power outages, I asked Gina for sort of a list of the outages and where they are, and we'll see what they turn up. But one of the things we may find is that the points of failure are actually outside the city limit. And I'm not sure exactly what we would do other than sort of cajole PG&E to trim the trees over in Monterey or in the capital area or wherever it is that those transmission lines come from. But we won't know. We won't know until we get that from them.
Yeah, we if we have another fire season like we did last year, we could be looking at blackouts, brownouts.
Yeah, and that's a separate issue.
And that's totally outside of our jurisdiction. But yeah, but I think it'd be good to collect some data and map it to see where where we're actually having the frequency of power outages, and that may lead to some less expensive solutions, or some other options to address those areas.
I'll mention on that exact note, and thank you for bringing that up. We received an email from PG&E, as probably all of you did. Those of you that have sort of an email address associated with your PG&E account, there is a PG&E virtual safety town hall next 2 weeks from yesterday on June the 2nd. And they're going to talk about public safety shutoff events. And one of the things that I was warned by Ms. Arnold when I was talking to her a couple of weeks ago is that there are going to be more of those this year than there have been in the past. So I guess they're getting better. I won't speculate as to why that's the case. Maybe less frequent, but more targeted. But there are definitely going to be more of those this year. And I think I had a question into her about what our vulnerability to these shutoff events is. Like, I don't know where our transmission lines come from.
Mm-hmm.
So they're also, so if I can keep going, she also mentioned, and I guess this isn't in the report, that there's something going on with a judge named Judge Alsup, which has to do with PG&E's trimming of power lines. So that may have an impact on us too. The second thing, the second set of recommendations was personal resiliency, and we talked about this at the meeting last time. Making new homes, does the committee have an inclination to recommend that the council make new homes ready for battery storage, whatever that might be? And the same question goes for, do we have an inclination to recommend to the council that new homes be ready for electric vehicles or for solar? So three recommendations that we could make to the council: PV, solar ready, electric vehicle ready, and battery storage ready. And I saw Libby's hand go up.
Yeah. Well, I think that is probably the most doable of these tasks. And for instance, any new home does require you to put solar on. So that's already a Monterey County code. I don't know I haven't done a project in Carmel for a little bit, so I don't know if that's a requirement on your end. But I think, what is the cost to make homes the EV ready to be fully electrified? Because I like how that also doubles as a greenhouse gas reduction. And rather than, not encouraging or trying to discourage people to buy generators, because there seems to be, once the power goes out, they all run generators, and then all that, gas goes everywhere. So I think I'd be curious, what that cost would be for a homeowner. Granted, they're different size homes, and what's the size of their system. I think there's a lot of variables, but let's say what would be the minimum that would keep a home, going for a short period of time until the grid is back on. And would the council or would the city be willing to incentivize this versus the 60 million plus that would be required for undergrounding? Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Committee members, Gary.
Yeah, I like what Libby said in terms of, going for the power generation fuel cell issue rather than the undergrounding. I think that's more attainable. So I'm kind of headed in that direction.
Maybe I know Michael is still there. He turned his camera off. Maybe Michael, you and I, or you and someone else could figure out how much these three things would add to the cost of a home. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea, off the top of your head, ready for battery storage, ready for an electric car, and ready for home power generation, either solar or fuel cells or something like that? Basically, how difficult it would be to make the home's infrastructure ready to go when you.
Yeah, I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, but those numbers are all readily available. And the reason why they're readily available is because there's a lot of solar contractors out there that want to sell you. I mean, you can go online and there's all kinds you can do kilowatt hour calculators. You can figure out how many, what you need for your house and come up with those numbers. So it just takes a little time, but yeah, you can come up with those numbers.
Do you think, so as a builder, these three things that are listed in this report, home power storage, EV ready, and home power generation, are those three things of such a minimal cost that we should go ahead and require them? I mean, that we should make a recommendation that they be required. I think that's my question to sort of your field of expertise.
Well, I like Libby's comment. I think she was the one that said, whether that makes more sense than looking at the $60 million. And I think it's probably the better way to go to make homes independent. The costs are really coming down. I mean, they're just dumping. Mm-hmm. It's incredible how cheap this stuff is getting. And there's lots of solar options. There's all kinds of battery storage options. And even if you don't put a whole solar system on your house, it's easy to have a battery backup with a few solar panels you can throw out in your yard if you need them. And it can keep, your refrigerator going, and it can keep your internet going. I mean, it's not going to run your whole house, but it's going to, you're not going to be, sitting there in the dark, with nothing to do, and your food's spoiling in the fridge. So and on the short term, that's really, I think, the strategy most people should be taking, because as we were talking about this isn't just about windstorms. This is about, the power grid is going to be shut off because of firestorms. And so each of us are going to have to deal with this, seasonally. And it isn't just going to happen in the winter. It's going to happen in the late summer, in the fire season, which can run into the fall. So I think individually, that's the way to go. That's kind of what I've been doing. And I'm going to expand my battery system. But we could come up with sort of a menu of, if you want this option, this is going to cost you this. and then provide some sources for different manufacturers that have, the latest state-of-the-art stuff at good prices,
Yes.
ease of use.
I guess my feeling, to riff on this a little bit would be, if we're going to require homes to be like EV ready, like whatever EV ready means, that we should have an understanding of what the cost of that is. If we're going to build that into our electrical code, that, you have to spend some number of dollars so that the next person that lives in your house can charge an electric vehicle in their driveway. I think we should know what sort of the baseline cost is before we make that recommendation. And I think that, to me, that's true of all of these three things: the EV ready and and not necessarily the cost of the battery, but the cost of configuring your electrical panel so that it can take the battery. Maybe I don't know how to exactly express that verbiage.
It seems to me, Jeff, that that's a really great approach, to have us understand costs, whatever they are, for whatever it is, so that we can say it has to be ready or you have to do it. Because whichever approach we might take, whether it's for new build or substantial remodels, without our knowing the cost, it seems a little irresponsible for us to make that kind of recommendation, even though we might feel it's the right thing to do. Getting acceptance, both public acceptance and council acceptance, seems to me to be in large part predicated on us understanding the costs.
And
Yeah.
I think rather than getting, like I'd recommend like maybe someone like David Knight from Monterey Energy Group, an engineer that might recommend like like a package, right? The minimum package that a homeowner could put on their home. I'm just 2 panels and a battery, and then having a special, charging station. I think the battery and panels is the key, and then the charging station if they happen to have an EV, or thinking about it. But I think it's also important, if it's going to be a requirement, that there's also a for those homeowners of who have a stretch, who have a challenge in terms of their income. If they can't afford it, maybe there's some kind of scholarship or incentive, a grant money that can help the homeowner towards this, or maybe the solar companies, if it's such a huge contract, that there's some deep discount. I just want to make sure that we're not requiring something that some homeowners can't afford to meet that requirement.
So Agnes, if we wanted to, or Evan, I guess, if we wanted to take these 3 things under personal resiliency and turn them into municipal code or regulations or whatever, and we wanted to investigate the costs and, write up appropriate language, and we have to do this. So let's say we have to do this in the next 9 months. Who's the right person to sort of help us with that little task? Is it, Libby and the Monterey Energy Group? Is it a builder? Is it like Michael, or is it an architect like John Hill? Or who's the resource that we could use to sort of figure out how to codify that stuff, put that stuff on paper?
The thing I'm still struggling with is, I guess, the level of readiness. Just for example, when I think, I'll just use EV ready as an example, you can have the conduit in place, or you could be ready by having the 220 volt plug in place. There seems to be different, metrics. On my car, I have one of the plug-in hybrids. I just plug into the 110 wall outlet. Is that EV ready? So I think we have to say, what level of readiness do we want? And then go from there. To Libby's point, I think we do need to think equitably about the cost of these things, because not all of them are going to be inexpensive either. So I do think we first would need to consider the range and maybe define the certain standard we want to achieve before we start looking at costs associated with these requirements.
So I think this is a good, I guess I would put this back on you, Evan, and I would say I agree with what you said and what Libby has said. I think this seems like a good rabbit hole to go down to investigate the answers to your questions, which are what exactly does EV ready mean?
And I'm sure there's a lot of resources out there. I know other cities have adopted similar reach codes. Libby, I think you mentioned Monterey County has a solar requirement.
Yeah, just that you have to have all new homes require solar per code. So, even well, no, I will clarify that if it includes ADUs, but I don't think so. But I think it might be something where we just form a little kind of subcommittee, and just with a few of us talking about it and talking about what that what that readiness would be, a definition, and then I'd be happy to make that connection with someone like David Knight at Monterey Energy Group, who's very passionate about this, and he would have a kind of non-objective point of view versus like a solar company that is probably there to kind of to sell their product. So but David, I think, would offer a lot of good feedback.
To me, what Libby said, like the subcommittee sounds like a reasonable idea to me. And maybe we could agree to sort of go down that road, and we could have a short discussion next month about who would be on that, who of us would be on that subcommittee, and sort of what they would be charged with doing. Does that sound all right? So I'll put together, I'll let Anya just write this down, but I'll write down the agenda item, but I'll put together some talking points for next month, and we'll see if we can enlist a couple of us to do some work over the course of the next few months. And that would include like talking to Libby and David and whoever, finding the resources to do that. Yes, Michael.
I was just gonna say David would be a good person to do a presentation to the committee, because he is passionate about this and he knows a lot about it, and he's a real fast talker. He can get a lot of information out quick.
So why don't I, if we have some room next month, Michael, you have a relationship with David. So yeah, why don't I know. What?
Yeah, I've known him for a long time.
So why don't we see, I'll assume that there's some room on the agenda next month, and there's probably more room the month after that. So why don't we see if we can enlist him? And then maybe Michael, you and I could just work on this little item, and then tell him that this is what the discussion is going to be. And he could be the speaker for that discussion. Then we could decide how we're going to move forward after that.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to make that same suggestion. Just get him in on the next conversation rather than have a conversation saying, oh, could he be on it? Just get him right in and seeing what he has to say about it would kind of move things on a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I want to be a little bit of a stickler for process here. I want to make sure that we know who on the committee is going to sort of manage this effort before the effort takes off. So maybe 2 months from now is a better time to have Mr. Knight come talk to us, and we could have the sort of the pre-discussion first. That would give him some more time to prepare, and we could have a discussion about what our goals are. what the goals are of having him come talk to us as part of that effort is, before we just go off on some tangent about things that we may not, things that may not be particularly useful to us. How does that sound?
Okay.
That makes
And
sense.
maybe to Evan's point, maybe we can figure out right now, like just to do that research about what other cities have done, so we can bring that to the table as well. So we just kind of have a little bit of an idea of, just a little bit of research before the next meeting, before we agree on who's going to be on the subcommittee.
Yeah, I was hoping actually to have the subcommittee do that research so that we don't burden Evan and Agnes with more work to do before next month. So that my goal is sort of to have, we're a working group here. And so to sort of parcel out this work to some of us. So sort of under Evan and Agnes's guidance, but not necessarily have not burden them with this extra work. That's sort of my goal, if that's all right. Okay. I see Carrie nodding her head. So let some of us do this. And this is kind of fun work. I mean, this is investigation and stuff like that. And it's good for us to do that sort of stuff and keep our fingers a little dirty. And then
I just wanted to mention that John Hill, in his email to me telling me that he wasn't able to come today, said, if there's anything you guys want me to do, want to assign to me, have at it. So.
Okay, well, there's one. So let's go back there. We'll pen his name in and leave another spot for someone else. And then the last thing on the list of things was Carmel resiliency. And this was explore areas in which Carmel should or provide resiliency services to local residents and businesses. And this is like warming shelters and stuff like that, sort of functionality that the community could provide. And I think this is a really interesting area of sort of community resilience. We talk about that, Chip talks about that every time a storm comes through. Chip talks about resilience. And I think that cooling areas may be something that we're forced to deal with, 20 years from now. And I know Lynette has talked a lot about taking care of the more vulnerable members of our community. So I'm thinking that now I've gotten Lynette's attention, I'm thinking that maybe this is an area.
You had it. I was writing down the community resiliency under my little thing.
Pivot your gaze over to your camera.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that maybe this is an area that you would be interested in exploring. This seems sort of like community-based and is up your alley.
Actually, I can talk about some of the things that have happened in regard of that topic along with this, or I can do a little summary after this, Jeff. But the answer would be yes. I think this is the kind of thing that would go under our equity and inclusion and umbrella that we want to be sure that our adaptation and action plans include. So sure.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we like assign sort of this area to you, this thing that's in my report?
Yeah.
And why don't you give the committee a presentation next month on how you see your job defined, and you can get some feedback from us. Okay. And then you can sort of take it and run. How does that sound?
That sounds good. I do want to tell you this time, though, where we have come since my assignment last month, what kind of outreach we've done and what kind of input we're expecting in the next few months, because there will be maybe one or two presentations that have to do with equity and inclusion that we want to propose to the committee. And I want to give Libby credit for being not only a willing collaborator, but a very valuable collaborator in my discussion and my outreach this past month. We've had several discussions.
Okay, so you need to stop because this is not on the agenda. So.
Oh, well, what it is, Jeff, is when you usually start the meeting, you go around and ask for each committee member to say if they have to say anything. And I had proposed to Agnes that instead of making this an agenda item this time, that little report be in that section.
Okay, so I didn't do that today. So do you want to talk under announcements? Do you want to just go ahead and do that? We have 7 minutes left until we get to 6.
Okay. What Libby and I have done together is to gather some inputs and some resource gathering so that we could begin to define exactly what equity and inclusion and the kind of equality issues of service and attention might mean in Carmel. I've reached out to the Carmel Foundation, and Holly, who is the president there, has agreed to continue a conversation and maybe talk to us as a committee about the population that the foundation serves and some of the needs that relate to climate change among that population. One of the things that she and I talked about initially was, in the case of an evacuation, how do people who are often served by the foundation who don't have a car, how do they effectively evacuate? Do we need and have a plan for such things that are climate related and may become more of an issue in the future? Libby and I had a very good conversation with some engineers who are in a firm in the Los Angeles area who have a very good perspective on what inclusion and equity means in terms of adaptation and climate action plans. So we're beginning to get a lot of information, which hopefully in the next month or two, depending upon the committee's schedule, we'll be able to do a presentation on. But I will do the one for next time on how I see that scope of work for what you've just assigned me.
Great.
And then there's one other little fun tidbit that I want everybody to know about. You may remember it's been, I don't know, maybe December when we talked about the All Saints School student project on their peace polls. Well, they've done their peace polls, and as you may also recall, one of them was the students' view of the challenges of climate change. And their inauguration and dedication for the peace polls is going to be on June 2nd at the church at 4 p.m. And I have asked Reverend Amber if they are still limiting attendance because of the pandemic, or if the general public, and certainly a member of council, Carrie had said she might be interested in attending to represent the city. So I'm waiting to hear back from them, but it's really cool to know that that big project for these kids is coming to fruition.
Great.
That's it.
Lynette, let me know.
I will, Carrie.
June 2nd.
I will. I
Okay.
expect to hear back from her either, well, hopefully by the end of tomorrow.
Okay, so I think that's it for today. We have some work to do with respect to that conversation next month on sort of building code, EV power grid related hookups. So I'll put that together. I'm gonna talk to Michael about the gray water, rainwater incentive systems and what that might look like, and maybe we'll have something next month or the month after that, or the month after that, or after that. And Lynette's going to talk to us about social justice and the things that I've listed, Carmel community-wide resiliency supplied by the city. I think that's a good summary.
So I'm a little unclear.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just a little unclear on who's doing the EV solar battery storage.
That's so we're going to have a discussion. I think the goal is to have a discussion next month to figure out who's going to do it.
Okay.
We got one sign up, Mr. Hill, and maybe we'll enlist Scott to work with him since he seems to have escaped scot-free this month.
Sounds good.
So we'll pen him in next month. We'll just leave that spot open for now.
My final question is, where is the climate committee's ask in this year's budget? Do we have a specific, I know we have our $20,000 for our greenhouse gas emissions. Do we have an ask in the budget? Because I didn't see anything, but I don't know the budget well enough to know if I missed it.
Can I talk to you after the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just talk to you after the meeting. We'll have a discussion about that, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Okay. You're all good? Agnes, you're good? All right, we'll see everybody next month.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.